The following program is sponsored by CBN.
Coming up, an 8-time All-Star and 4-time World Series champion.
Wow, I just couldn't believe how good I was.
Darryl Strawberry talks about the thrill of victory.
That's so amazing to be able to do the things that I was able to do.
And the agony of multiple addictions.
How did I get here from stardom to the pit?
His answer to the opioid crisis.
I am a prime example.
On today's 700 Club.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. We're so happy to have you with us. Let me start out with saying one thing that's clear. Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, should go. He should resign. He has failed the president terribly in this so-called recusal where he has absented himself. And because of it, Rosenstein, his deputy, has appointed a special counsel who is supposed to find a crime. The crime is supposed to be specified as to what he's looking for. But what has a stripper got to do with Russia? The whole thing is insane. There is no crime. And to raid an attorney's office and seize attorney-client privilege documents is an absolute outrage. And the Attorney General is responsible, and he should resign. Just that simple. Say, Mr. President, I have failed you. I am out of here. And, I don't care how loyal he was in the early days. By recusing himself, he has left the president open to this nonsense. And it's long overdue that the special counsel also be dismissed. He's going far, far afield. If you would please tell me, somebody would tell me, how a stripper or whatever else she was, what was she besides a stripper?
Well,
She's a porn star. How that in any way is impacted by the Russians in the election. And that was what the Attorney General was supposed to appoint a person, and that's what this special prosecutor is about. It's an absolute outrage, and the president said it well. He said it's a whole new level of unfairness. Well, Mr. President, you're the guy in charge. Let's get this monkey off your back and get the thing done and, cut it and get on with life. Okay.
Well, the raid came as the president considers a military strike against Syria after that deadly chemical weapons attack killed women and children this weekend. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy brings us the story from Washington.
President Trump condemned the attack in Syria, calling it a barbaric act that cannot be allowed to happen. A horrifying gas attack in Syria prompted President Trump to warn that nothing is off the table in response to the strike that killed at least 40 people. Chilling images of kids surfaced, victims of the latest suspected chemical weapons attack.
We cannot allow atrocities like that.
Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad denied he is behind the violence, claiming the video is fabricated. Not true, said UN Ambassador Nikki Haley.
The monster who was responsible for these attacks has no conscience, not even to be shocked by pictures of dead children.
The attack took place less than a week after Trump said he wanted to pull U.S. troops from Syria. In the meantime, the soldiers will stay, along with a warning that those involved will pay a big price. Trump also criticized Assad's most powerful supporter, Russian President Vladimir Putin, making it clear he intends to take action.
Does Putin bear responsibility for this?
He may, he may. And if he does, it's going to be very tough. Very tough.
He'll pay a price if
everybody's going to pay a price. He will, everybody will.
While the president prepared for a meeting with military leaders about Syria, the news came that the FBI had raided the office of Trump's longtime personal attorney, Michael Cohen. Agents took documents, including some possibly tied to a $130,000 payment Cohen made to porn star Stormy Daniels, who says she had a sexual encounter with Trump in 2006, a claim the White House denies. The Cohen raid is apparently not linked to the Russian probe, according to the New York Times, but it also said he's being investigated for bank fraud.
They broke into the office of one of my personal attorneys, good man, and it's a disgraceful situation.
Surrounded by top military advisors, Trump lashed out at the raid and special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation, calling it a witch hunt.
That is really now in a whole new level of unfairness.
Today, President Trump is focused on Syria. Last year, he ordered a military strike on a Syrian airfield after a suspected sarin gas attack. But it's clear Assad did not take that warning very seriously after yet again, civilians were the target of this latest strike. So now President Trump is threatening more military action against Syria, which is likely to happen soon. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Well, the old dictator of Syria was Hafez al-Assad. He was, without question, a butcher. And what he did in the city of Hama was outrageous. He killed about 20, 30,000 people just ruthlessly. Well, his son has been trained as a medical doctor. He's been trained in Europe. The old nastiness should not be attached to him. And yet he's brought a level of barbarity way beyond what his father did. And we've got to deal with that. And it looks like to me, you shut down his Air Force. I mean, if we got Tomahawk missiles, we've got cruisers and destroyers out in the Gulf, offshore with Syria. And it's time just to blast that guy, bomb his palace, bomb his headquarters, and if possible, take him out. He's, as I say, reached a new level of barbarity, and it should not be allowed to stand. And, you know, Trump has taken action against those oligarchs. He has really hurt Putin, their friends in the pocketbook, and their stock holdings are being cut as much as half and more. And by taking out those oligarchs, and he's gone after some high-level people. These are the people who are around Putin, and this is going to hurt him a lot more than some of these other things we've talked about. So it's targeted and well-placed. So the president's getting tough, and, you know, I think Americans applaud it. Well, in other news, has your personal information been compromised while you were using Facebook? I'm glad to say I don't, but if you have, tough luck. John Jessup.
Thanks, Pat. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg faces tough questions about what happens to your personal information and the recent scandals involving online political news in his testimony before 3 congressional committees and 2 hearings. Eric Rosales has that story.
The Facebook founder has reportedly faced intense preparations for today's back-to-back hearings on the privacy data scandal. Now, prior to that testimony, Zuckerberg headed up to Capitol Hill and met with Florida Senator Bill Nelson, the top Democrat on the Commerce Committee.
If we don't watch out with social media and platforms like Facebook and the mistakes that they made in the past, then no American is going to have any privacy anymore.
In a PR push, Facebook released Zuckerberg's opening statement on Monday. In it, Zuckerberg takes responsibility for his company. Zuckerberg states Facebook is an idealistic and optimistic company. For most of our existence, we focused on all the good that connecting people can bring. Zuckerberg lays out his version of what happened in the Cambridge Analytica scandal and Facebook's steps to remedy the events, stating, "It's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. That goes for fake news, foreign interference in elections, and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy." Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy says he's concerned Facebook may be too big to fix.
Is it fair for me to give up all of my personal data to Facebook and apparently everybody else in the Western Hemisphere in exchange for me being able to see what some of my high school buddies had for dinner Saturday night? Who owns my data? Do I own it, or does Facebook own it?
So what new regulations could be on the horizon? Technology evangelist Brian Vecchi with Varonis Systems says lawmakers could take a page from Europe, where a new law aims to provide more protection and control for citizens' personal data.
If you're going to collect this information, the personal data of an EU citizen, you need to treat it with respect. You need to treat it like something valuable. You should only collect what you're supposed to, and if you don't need it anymore, you should delete it.
Over the next few days, all 2.2 billion Facebook users will receive a notice titled Protecting Your Information. It will show you what apps you use and what information Facebook has shared with those apps. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Eric. While stories like Facebook, Syria, and the Russia investigation grab headlines, the Congressional Budget Office is warning of another quietly growing problem here in Washington. The annual federal deficit will soon cross the $1 trillion mark, and that's going to radically increase the national debt in just a decade. Charlene Aaron has the story.
The new analysis by the Congressional Budget Office projects we'll see the federal deficit rise above $1 trillion a year within 2 years.
That's earlier than had been previously expected. The deficits are expected to drive the national debt from $21 trillion now up to $33 trillion within 10 years. The Congressional Budget Office says the new tax cuts will add to the deficit. But even though the deficit is on the rise, Congress doesn't seem to be likely to cut spending. House Republican leaders have scheduled a vote this week on a constitutional amendment to require a balanced federal budget, but it's virtually certain to fail. President Trump signed a $1.3 trillion spending plan in late March to fund the government through September. He said the only reason he signed off on the bill on national security grounds was because it rebuilds America's military and improves homeland security.
I will never sign another bill like this again. I'm not going to do it again.
And the debt problems could get worse. Interest rates are expected to rise in the years ahead, which will make interest payments on the national debt even more expensive and could lead to cutbacks in other government spending, from social programs to the military.
CBO Director Keith Hall warns that rising debt raises the chances of a fiscal crisis in the years ahead. And the question is, what will Washington do about it? Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
$1 trillion debt. Pat, this is something that you've been warning about for quite some time.
Well, I have, and the people in Washington don't seem to think that money is available anytime. It's like it grows on trees, and they can just reach out and shake the tree and get some more money. But the day of reckoning is coming. It's going to be tough. It really is, because if the interest rates begin to go up, and they will, I mean, they've been at historic lows. And all of a sudden, we're looking at 3%, 4%, 5%, back to the normal of what interest rates have been. So you take 5% of $30 trillion, and you tell me how much money that is. And that's what is going to be coming out of the federal budget. And when it's over, there's not going to be any money for anything else except paying interest, which means that this country, this great nation of ours, is going to have to default on its debt. It cannot sustain this. And before long, instead of being the reserve currency of the world, the dollar is going to be downgraded. And then we will have incredible pain and suffering in this country. It's all coming about, and it'll always come about when people are profligate. And that's what's happening. Our government is just unbelievably profligate. And when somebody tries to tell them, well, let's cut here, no. Well, you can't cut here. Well, this interest group complains, and that one wants this benefit, and this one wants something else. And the congressmen just pay up. And nobody seems to be standing in line for fiscal sanity. But it's got to be done. And if we don't do it quick, the nations of the world are going to do it for us. And it won't be painful. I mean, painless. It'll hurt every single human being in America.
Is it doable? Is it doable?
What, to stop spending?
No, to fix what's been done.
Well, it is, but it would be a 10 to 15-year project where you start cutting and bringing things in line. But there's so many interest groups, they want their money, and, everybody wants their money. And, these benefits, for example, the cost of the social programs, the so-called entitlements, are going to go out of sight. And yet the president has said, I don't want to deal with them. Nobody wants to deal with entitlements. But we should add to the age of people getting benefits. instead of, 65, it should be 67, then 70, and so forth. As people are aging, we could ease that up a little bit. That wouldn't be dramatic. There was a commission that did a superb job, and it was just shelved. I mean, it came in, and they just ignored it. And, I remember years ago, the Grace Commission, they did intensive job trying to figure out how to save money on this federal deficit. And it was ignored. I mean, it was just, they give them to the Congress, yeah, thanks, big yawn, and then gone. But Congress is going to have to pay, and it's going to hurt. Folks, it's going to hurt. It really is going to be very, very painful. And if we lose our reserve currency status, and the dollar is no longer the reserve currency of the world, then I just can't describe how painful it's going to be. Terry?
Well, coming up, a look at biblical prophecy unfolding through the organization formed to reestablish Israel and to bring the Jewish people to their homeland. That's coming up next.
The Jewish Agency, that's a simple name, but a powerful organization. It helped to establish the modern state of Israel and to bring the Jewish people home. Take a look.
Founded in 1929, the Jewish Agency predated the modern state of Israel by 19 years. Some say it's an organization created by God, using men to fulfill His purposes. Today, one of the main missions of the Jewish Agency is still to bring the Jewish people back to the land. And seeing Jewish people return is like watching Bible prophecy unfold. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel all speak of the Jewish return to the land. Jewish Agency Chairman Natan Sharansky told new immigrants they had fulfilled the dream of generations.
Only think for a moment, each of you, about your fathers, your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers, all those generations of your families, of Jews who were dreaming and praying next year in Jerusalem. And you did it.
The Jewish Agency's mission? Inspire Jews worldwide to connect with their people, heritage, and homeland, and empower them to build a Jewish future and strong Israel. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Well, Alan Hoffman is the Director General of the Jewish Agency, and it's a pleasure to welcome him today to the 700 Club. Alan, good to see you. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Pat.
Pleasure.
And I send you regards from Natan Sharansky.
He's a great man and a dear friend. I'm so glad. Let me ask you, the agency, established the state of Israel and were instrumental in bringing these people in. Why do people still want to go to Israel?
Well, as you know, the biblical prophecy
is
that the Lord will bring the Jewish people together from all four corners of the world. Mm-hmm. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, right throughout the Bible. And when the state of Israel was created, all the way back there, we're about to celebrate 70 years next week. Mm-hmm. When the state of Israel was created, there were less than 600,000 Jews living in Palestine at that time. Mm-hmm. Since that time, we have brought from all over the world over 4 million Jews to live in Israel. And many of the greatest achievements of Israel that we know in technology and in defense, the motive behind that have been the people who have come from the countries from which they've come to live in Israel.
Well, do they get a chance to visit Israel in advance, or they come sight unseen?
So some do. Uh-huh. There are new programs like Birthright, which we're a partner in which young Jews do have an opportunity to come to Israel. Mm-hmm. But that's still a small minority of the immigrants. Most of the immigrants who we have brought in the last 70 years have been refugees. A million Jews who came from the former Soviet Union after the Iron Curtain came down in the last 25 years, or the Jews of Morocco in the 1960s, or the Jews of Tunis, many of the Jews of Iraq, 120,000 Jews in the 1950s were expelled by their countries once there was a Jewish state, and the state of Israel has absorbed them.
Well, that's quite an expense, too, isn't it? I mean, the people, but they're delighted to take on that burden, and that is a burden to resettle their compatriots.
This has been an expense which we, acting on behalf of World Jewry, have helped make possible. So in the initial years of the state, when there wasn't a budget and Israel was fighting a war on 5 different fronts, it was World Jewry that made it possible to actually bring these Jews, get them out sometimes by secret ways from the countries in which they're living and bring them to Israel. But imagine that in the first 5 years of Israel, we doubled the population of Jews within the first 5 years while still at war. It would be something akin to the United States having over 300 million immigrants over the next 5 years.
Be unbelievable, unbelievable. I remember meeting with one of your prime ministers, and he was telling me of an occasion where Ben Gurion was meeting with Charles de Gaulle, and de Gaulle said, well, Mr. Prime Minister, what do you want? You want some more territory? You want some more money? You want some arms? And he said, I want more Jews. and he said, de Gaulle said, you mean that's what you want is more Jews? And they said, yes. But that's what the country needed.
And as you know, Pat, I think, I'm not sure all the viewers know, that the very first law that's on the books of the Knesset of Israel is what we call the law of return, which says any Jew, the moment they put their foot in the state of Israel, has the right to become a citizen. So that was Ben Gurion's vision. He said, without 5 million Jews, we will not be a viable state. We've passed that number many years ago.
Well, what about the conflict that's going on right now? The nations of the earth seem to be coming against Israel. Are you able to resist that? It looks like the Jewish state has established military supremacy in the Middle East and technological supremacy. These wonderful companies are making all kinds of advances in technology.
I think that Israel has, also with the help of the United States over all of these years, the United States has been Israel's most steadfast ally, including most recently the decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem. I live in Jerusalem, and next week will be the 70th anniversary of Israel. And we welcome the fact that the United States is transferring its embassy. And Israel has kept this technological edge. But I think that you are right, which is that after 1967, after that magnificent victory of 1967, there has been a turn in which the nations of the world have, in many cases, chosen to take a very hostile perspective on the right of the State of Israel to self-determination and to have its own state, and ignores the fact that we are 8 million people living in a sea of people who are committed to our destruction and to throwing us into the sea. And so I think it's not only military and technological, there's a very big moral issue here as well.
I'm just thinking about the United Nations. It seems like it's been a nothing but a sounding board against Israel. And what are you recommending should be done with the UN? Do you have any initiative on that?
We're very happy with the current United States ambassador to the United Nations, and I think that her position on the state of Israel and her taking such a clear and hard line is seen by most Israelis as a welcome change.
What about this uprising in Gaza? Hamas is moving across, and there's been some, I don't know what they're trying to do. Are they trying to break the boundaries and invade Israel? What is it those people are going for? Do you know?
There are a couple of million people in Gaza, as you know, who are living in conditions that you nor I would not like to see anybody living in. And I think our hearts go out to the people living in Gaza. But in many ways, I think they're the victim of their leadership. Yeah. And I think that the fact that there is such an opportunity when Prime Minister Ariel Sharon decided to withdraw from the Jewish settlements around the Gaza area, I think that there was an idealistic idea that maybe this would set in motion a process of some kind of reconciliation and cooperation with Gaza. But unfortunately, the Hamas have taken over there, and instead of cooperating with Israel on agriculture and drip agriculture and using our technology and our medical services, we find ourselves having rockets rained on our kibbutzim that are as far from the border as this audience is right here in this room.
And so there's really nothing Israel can do except defend itself against those rocket attacks. Is that it? You have to.
I think Israel needs, on the one hand, to defend itself. And I think that first it was rockets, and when the rockets didn't work, they dug tunnels. And that created a war, and I think it took Israel a year or two to create the kind of borders that made it impossible now to dig tunnels and to get to Israel through the tunnels. And I think each time we have to deal with whatever is being thrown up against us, while at the same time think about how we can reach out to the man in the street in Gaza who I think wants a better life.
Of course. Well, I appreciate so much your being here, and I wish you the very best. And the Jewish Agency and we're great friends of Israel, as I'm sure you know, and we're just delighted to have you with us.
I think it's so wonderful that you have had this program for so many years, and Israel has always been on your personal agenda, on the agenda of this program. And as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of Israel next week, and we think about the fact that the Jewish Agency has been the instrument to bring 4 million Jews to Israel, and we continue to do this day in and day out. And that's part of the story of fulfilling the biblical prophecy.
That's right. Well, we see it before our eyes, and we're thrilled that you're part of it. So God bless you, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Terry?
Well, the Bible says that through Israel, the entire world will be blessed. And that prophecy is unfolding right before our eyes. All next week on the 700 Club, you'll see it come to life in our new CBN documentary called To Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. This exclusive series shows Israelis helping people from around the world, people who are suffering due to disasters, hunger, poverty, sickness, thirst, or the ravages of war. See how they're finding help and compassion sent to them from Israel. So join us next Monday, that's April 16th on the 700 Club, and all next week for To Life. And coming up today, baseball icon Darryl Strawberry talks about the thrill of victory and the agony of addiction.
The real rock bottom was in the Florida State Prison because of addiction. Not guilty of any crime, and how did I get here from stardom to the pit?
See how the four-time world champion is taking on the opioid crisis after this.
Darryl Strawberry, four-time world champion. He remains one of baseball's most feared success stories. During his 17-year career, he struggled with two powerful addictions. Well, you'll see what it is. Today, and his wife are committed to fighting the explosive opioid epidemic here in America. Recently, Darryl talked with CBN's Tom Buehring about him and his wife's faith-based addiction treatment center.
We need to deal with sin in this culture because it keeps us separated from God's great love. The depth of bondage is real.
Darryl Strawberry was an 8-time All-Star and 4-time World Series champion. Admired for his swing, but notorious for his self-destructive addictions he would later overcome. The slugger turned minister has since opened addiction centers in Florida, where he and his wife Tracy have answered the charge to take on the opioid crisis. You've learned a lesson over the years.
It reminds you it's never about you. I think too many of us think it's about us, but it's about His plan and His purpose working through you to make a difference in someone else's life.
Summarize your baseball career.
Awesome. When you play it and be successful and be broken at the same time. That's so amazing to be able to do the things that I was able to do throughout my major league career. It's only a short window for you to excel, and then it's over, and then who are you?
Does it look different to you now on this side of it?
That's a good point, Tom. It looks totally different now. When I look at old clips of me and I say, wow, I just couldn't believe how good I was. I never recognized myself as that. I enjoyed playing. I had fun winning.
Your rock bottom.
Well, I had a lot of rock bottoms, but the real rock bottom was in the Florida State Prison with a T17169 because of addiction. Not guilty of any crime, but guilty of the consequences because of my sins. And how did I get here from stardom to the pit?
What do you find to be the most frequent source for addiction?
What I find more than anything is how's the household? If you're not there and available for the kids and you're not pouring real things into their life, a lot of fathers don't understand why kids are broken because the father has never walked a faithful walk, and now it's allowed his kids to be affected.
What was childhood like for you?
It was very difficult. It was very challenging, very lonely more than anything. And the brokenness of my life became because of the emptiness and the rejection from my father. You know, I found myself playing baseball because of my pain, which my pain would eventually lead me to my greatness, and then eventually lead me to my destructive behavior because of the emptiness inside.
Growing addictions nationally, what's the concern you have about this epidemic?
The concern I have about the epidemic of opiate and heroin addiction is people are losing their life. And pharmaceutical companies are getting rich. Now, a kid 15, 16 years old, once they alter their mind changes forever. And once prescription painkillers come into play, they get addicted to them immediately because they can always go back and get more. It's just like a drug dealer on the street.
Youth, what's between your experience at that age and their experience?
As a person who has struggled with that and remember the fingers being pointed at me, I'm realizing today that our society is broken, spiritually broken. It's why we're having such a negative impact with addiction, and we need to bring hope. People need to come back and learn to love people and help people right where they're at.
Are rehab agencies open to consider faith?
Treatment centers are more open, and actually I'm turning my treatment facility into a Christian, Christ-centered treatment center because I know it works. And I think the government is looking into more faith-based programs to come into play to make a difference.
A person's issues, it re-involves their entirety.
That's the only way you're gonna get well. I mean, we've dealt with it from so many different angles, and it hasn't put a dent into what's happening. If we can get biblical principles back into people's lives, people will get well. He brings about restoration and restore people's lives to wholeness. I am a prime example.
Addiction is addiction. Where else are we seeing signs in society?
Sex addiction is very powerful. And that's why you see so many men get caught up in pornography, because it's a desire that has developed inside of you, and you find yourself in places that you can never imagine. And my sex addiction was very strong, and I lost 2 marriages because of that.
As destructive as drug addiction?
Yes, it is. So many struggle with it, and we don't want to talk about it because it's shameful, because you have to stop kidding yourself and stop lying to yourself and safeguard yourself. When we deal with those real inside issues, that's when we become overcomers.
For those watching, whatever the addiction is, how do they confront it to become free?
Commit to someone else and openly share your struggles. When we can get to that place, you can get delivered. You understand that he loves you right where you're at. Christ himself will never point fingers at you. He'll say, come as you are. Christ is here to rescue you first. Then he's here to redeem you with his blood. Then he's going to restore you with his grace.
That broad measure of deliverance. For you, Darryl Strawberry, Jesus Christ has become a hero, a rescue. What does he mean to you?
Christ means everything to me. I always wanted to know why I was created, not just hitting home runs and winning championships and making millions of dollars, but why am I here? And I needed to understand that. And when you come and make your commitment to Jesus, he will show you everything about yourself, and he will deliver you, and he will set you free from the bondage and the chains of darkness.
That's the question everybody asks. Why am I here? What is the reason for my existence? Why am I here? Well, Darryl had the answer, and God bless him. What a wonderful transformation. And Terry was saying that if they ever saw Romans 8:28, God shapes everything together for good to them that love him. And with Darryl Strawberry, he shaped everything together for good. And I'm just so proud of that man, what he's done. Fabulous, fabulous athlete, fabulous baseball player, but he was tripped up on the thing that's got its hold on so many people, sex and drugs. Terry?
Well, also, I think such a picture of the power of a father in a child's life.
Amen.
Immeasurable. Right. Well, still ahead, you can stay home with your kids. It's the dream of many working mothers. Today, we're going to meet a mom who made that dream her reality, and she'll show you how you can make it yours.
And welcome back to the 700 Club. Federal prosecutors say the classified advertising website Backpage.com made millions of dollars in advertisements for prostitution, and it ignored warnings to stop running the ads promoting prostitution, sometimes involving children. Those charges came in a federal indictment unsealed Monday. Federal authorities seized the website on Friday. Those fighting against sex trafficking praised the government's action. Wild weather has been sweeping through most of the country more than 2 weeks into spring. Winter weather slammed down from North Dakota to North Carolina, with wind chills in the 20s, snow and ice causing more than 24 accidents over the weekend. And in the South, 10 tornadoes were reported from Texas to Louisiana. This while the West Coast is suffering April storms, bringing flooding and heavy winds. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by visiting our website, cbnnews.com. Pat and Terry are back with more of today's 700 Club. It's coming up right after this.
In 2012, Erin Odom and her husband hit rock bottom financially. Erin needed to work full-time, but she wanted to stay home with her children, and she figured out a way to do just that.
Erin Odom's blog post, "Staying at Home with Your Kids When You Can Barely Afford It," went viral with more than 1 million views. Erin started the blog after she and her husband struggled to make ends meet. They filed for bankruptcy and even went on government aid. But eventually they were able to make a financial comeback. In her latest book, You Can Stay Home with Your Kids, Erin shares tips and tricks to help you curb spending and create more income so you can reset your bank account.
Please welcome to the 700 Club, Erin Odom. It's great to have you here, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's go back to 2012 for a minute, if we can, and talk a little bit about the financial crisis you all found yourselves in. How bad did it get?
Well, we were living on a low income. We discovered at first we didn't even know we were low income until we met with some teachers from our church. And we had a home in a different state that wasn't selling. It sat on the market for 4 years underwater. We ended up losing that home. We were trying to make it on my husband's teacher salary in North Carolina, which had a salary freeze, right? And we were really struggling. We had a low income and we were using government aid and we were spinning our wheels trying to learn how to make ends meet, and we just felt like we couldn't do it.
In the middle of all of this, you had a heart desire to be a stay-at-home mom with your kids. Where did that come from, do you think?
My mom was always a stay-at-home mom from the time I was 2 years old, and I always desired to give my children that as well, to stay at home with them. And so I prayed about it, and I just really felt that tug. I did work full-time outside the home for my first daughter's first year, but then we decided to try to make it work despite our income.
Oh, that was kind of jumping off the cliff, wasn't it?
It was. It was.
Where did you get the idea that writing a blog could help you with this?
Well, at the time, I was doing a lot of different side gigs. I was tutoring some kids. I was teaching other kids homeschool Spanish. I was freelancing for several local newspapers. And I really felt like the Lord just gave people that message to give to me. One of them wasn't even a believer. It was my newspaper editor. The same week, my college roommate, they didn't know each other, but they both said, Aaron, there are moms who are making incomes, full-time incomes, at home with their kids by blogging. You should think about this.
What did God speak to you about your writing?
You know, it's really interesting, Terry. When I was in college, I studied journalism, but I also had a deep desire to be a missionary. When I was 15, I felt God calling me to ministry. And when I was in college, I really felt like the Lord was saying, you're going to reach more people through writing.
Wow.
I really didn't listen to the Lord for a while. And I said, no, God, I want to be on the mission field. I want to be in Latin America. I want to look at people eye to eye that I'm ministering to. And I kept feeling him say, you're going to reach more people through writing. So fast forward all those years later, I went 6 years without writing at all. And the Lord said, I've given you this gift. I've given you this passion from the time you were a little girl, and I want you to do this. So I began, never imagining that within 2 years of starting my blog, I would be making more money on it than my husband was teaching.
Unbelievable. At the time, I know you wouldn't have seen this, but do you look back now and see that even your financial crisis was a nudge?
Absolutely. I look back at that financial crisis, and it was the catalyst that God used to get me exactly where he wanted me to be. Yeah. This was his calling on my life from the time I was a little girl, but I fought it and I didn't want to do it. Yeah. And he used that. It was out of desperation that I started that blog, hoping that some way, somehow it would start an income for our family.
How long did you write the blogs before you thought, wow, something's going on here?
Let's see, I did it for about a year before I was creating much of anything significant. When you're blogging, it starts out with a penny here, a penny there. And at first I didn't even really keep a faithful accounting of it. And then within 2 years, my husband and I said, okay, we really can't, you can't stop this, you know? And I was doing it in the cracks of life. I was stay-at-home mom by day, and my kids would go down for a nap or they would go to sleep at night, and then I was writing. Wow. And I just kept working on it. And I truly believe that God has gifted us each uniquely, and that there are moms out there that have different gifts than I do, but that they could still use those gifts to create income for their families.
Well, the subtitle of your book is 100 Tips, Tricks, and Ways to Make It Work on a Budget. Give me a couple of your favorite.
So one of my favorite right now is hopping on a health share plan. So there are Christian health share plans. There are 4 big ones in the United States. And basically it's where believers pool their money together to save money on health care needs. My husband and I have been on one for about a year now. We were paying about $800 a month when he was teaching, which was really hard for us for health insurance. Now we pay $449 a month for our family of 6. We have a $1,500 annual unshared amount, which is equal to a deductible. Yeah. And so we pay $1,500 out of pocket, and after that, they cover our health care needs.
So really, on so many of the tips and the ways that you offer in the book, I mean, you're able to offer them and to explain them because you've walked through them.
Absolutely. And I really look back to my childhood. My parents were extremely frugal, and they really instilled so many frugal living tips in me that God was preparing me for that time where we would be low income, and I would rely on those tips so much to make it through each day. And now he has given me that wisdom to share with other moms who desire to be at home with their kids.
And you know, not everybody's going to be a wonderful writer. That's the gift that God has given you, but you share some creative ideas on how moms and dads can creatively produce additional income for themselves. Give me one of those.
So being a virtual assistant, if you are very organized, if you have administrative skills, you can be a virtual assistant, EA.com. You can look for an online secretarial type job, whether you're a mom or a dad. Something else is VIP Kid. If you have any teaching experience, even homeschooling your own children, and you have a college degree, you can earn up to $25 an hour by teaching children in China English via the internet.
My niece was just hired.
Was she?
Yes, I think it's a genius idea. I mean, everybody's need is met.
I love it. I have friends that are single moms that make an income through VIP Kid and tutoring. So they're able to stay at home with their kids. They're able to use their gifts.
So amazing. You and your husband have 4 children. You're thriving now, I'm assuming.
We do. We have 4 children, and every day I look at other people with 4 and I say, that's a lot of kids. And then I realize we have 4 kids too.
Oh, yeah.
We are very blessed.
That's wonderful. Well, Erin's book is called You Can Stay Home with Your Kids, 100 Tips, Tricks, and Ways to Make It Work on a Budget. It's available wherever books are sold. Plus, Erin shares more of her amazing tips in our social exclusive interview with her on Facebook. If you'd like to check that out, I encourage you to do it. Just go to facebook.com/700club. Wonderful to have you here. Creative lady.
Thank you so much.
Well, still ahead, we've got your email. Mary says, God told me who I'm going to marry. This guy I've known all my life, but he has no interest in me. Please help. I don't know what to do. Let's find out what Pat says about that. It's coming up. Time for your questions and some honest answers. And Pat, this first one comes from Mary, who says, hi, Pat, I've been very depressed lately. I feel like such a failure because all of my friends are married. I pray every hour to God to send me someone. God told me who I'm going to marry, this guy I've known my whole life. His family and mine are very close, but it seems like he has no interest in me. Please help. I don't know what to do.
Well, I think the biggest thing is you're too anxious. You know, anxious runs men away, you know.
Yes, it does.
It really does.
Yeah,
I mean,
agree.
what you've got to do is just cool, and you've got everything going for you. And, you know, you feel like you're a failure because you're not married. I mean, that's terrible. Why should you feel that way? I mean, God has given you gifts. He's given you whoever you are. Rejoice in who you are, and let the Lord complete you. Don't think some man is going to complete you. I mean, but the last, huh?
Amen.
Wise
counsel.
Amen.
Yes.
Seriously.
Seriously. Yeah.
But if the more anxious you are, men will just run from somebody who, I just have to have a man and you're it. I mean, no way. Okay.
Okay.
Next question.
This is Sylvia, who says, Dear Pat, I have an overwhelming fear of horses. When I was just a girl, a horse from a horse-drawn carriage tried to bite my face. It was a Clydesdale with those furry hoofs. Can you imagine? I've been terrified of them ever since. I freeze up every time I see them. I do not want to feel this fear anymore. I know you're an expert equestrian, so I thought I should turn to you. What should I do to overcome my fear of horses?
Well, I think what you've got to do is to get with them. I mean, a Clydesdale is a huge monster. They are great big beasts, and if the thing tried to bite you, I mean, that's awful. All right, what do? You've got to have somebody walk with you and just pet the horse. I mean, get a horse that's very gentle and just stroke him. And then give him a little grain, and you got to hold your hand out so it's smooth so they won't bite your fingers. And just hold it out, and the horse will, really appreciate you. And before long, get around them and get comfortable. Get a brush and just brush them. And before long, you'll think, well, these are really nice creatures. And they like people, and they want to be submissive to people. So, if you're afraid, here's what a horse thinks. He said, I'm not going to hurt her, she's not going to hurt me, so something's going to hurt us both. And so the horse gets all spooky because of your fear. So the more you are afraid, the more the horse will get spooky. So what you have to do is just rub them and be around them for a while. And I don't know what else to do, but I think that'll overcome it somewhat. What do you have?
This is Alea who says, my question is, if one of your family members goes to hell and you make it to heaven, will you see them again?
I don't know about all this business about seeing loved ones if they're in hell. There's a great gulf fixed. You remember the Bible says, between us there's a great gulf fixed. And I can't go over to you and you can't come over to me. So I don't think you're going to be in touch. If one of your relatives is in hell, that's where they are, and you're in heaven. I mean, good for you. But I don't think that's going to, can you see them possibly? But I don't think you're going to be close to communicate.
Okay, this is Jamie who says, Dear Pat, I'm a new mother and I'm so concerned about the state of the world. How do I protect my child and instill strong Christian values in spite of everything children are exposed to?
You know, I thought that with my last child. We have 4 children, and this little girl was born, and I thought, what's going to happen to her in this terrible world we live in? What's going to happen to her? Well, she's crowding 50 now, and she's making it pretty nice.
Doing very well.
She has a wonderful family, and she's doing extremely well. And she survived, and I think our children will survive. God will look after our children, and I think we commit them to the Lord. And if we do that, and if we give them over to God, and we ask for His protection, He will protect them from the forces that are in this world. We leave you with today's Power Minute from the Psalms. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in Him. Well, tomorrow, a baby born with no left pulmonary artery gets a creative miracle. You don't want to watch it. You don't want to miss it. We'll see you on tomorrow's 700 Club. So for Terry and all of us, God bless you. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.